Hello and welcome to this week's BizSmart Lunch and Learn webinar. Our weekly webinars are aimed to provide advice and share knowledge amongst business owners, and this is part of our service to our Smart Room members. If you're not already a member or a BizSmart client or would like to access our archive of webinars, then please visit our website biz-smart.co.uk and go to the Smart Room page. My host joining me today is BizSmart Core Advisor and Select Member Jill Hutchinson. But before we start today's webinar, can I ask you all to use the question mark function on your screen to post any questions that you may have for Jill, and she will answer them all at the end of the session. Thank you, Jill. Over to you.
Thank you, Caroline. So we're going to start with a look at Google Analytics, and by the end of the session I hope you've got enough knowledge to set up your own website dashboard, if you like, which will have key performance indicators that you can get from the analytics data and measure and monitor over time. So that's the objective for today. So it's quite a factual webinar today. So essentially Google is it's the simplest, the easiest, it's the most widely used free tool to monitor traffic or visitors to your website. Setting it up is actually the most difficult thing to do if you're a beginner. So the easiest thing to do is get whoever builds your website to build that tracking code onto each page when it's done. And once they activate that and set up a Google account for you, you have a login and a password and you can get into your data anytime you want. So that's the simplest way of getting started. Okay, normally I warble on about strategy at this point. Google Analytics data isn't really a strategy, it's a way of measuring, and therefore it's a way of monitoring your marketing. So it can help in lots of different areas of your planning. Obviously it's going to be used in some of your KPI measurements that you're going to choose to look at probably on a monthly basis. But essentially what we're doing is looking at the behaviour of people on your website. So what pages do they go to? What's the flow? Where do they start? Where do they move to? What do they find interesting? So it's a little bit of Big Brother exercise in looking at the behaviour of people on your website. If you're using pay-per-click advertising, you can monitor traffic and you can work out an ROI, an investment, return on investment calculation. So that's useful if you're using it for advertising. But it's also a way of checking whether your strategies are working. So if you're doing promotions on social media or some new blogs, or you're driving traffic to certain pages of your website, wherever they're coming from, you can track whether that's working and making an impact and getting more visitors. So either it's working, great, you can do more of that, or if it isn't working, go back and look at what you're doing and see if you could tweak it if it's not. So it's all about measurement. It's one way of measuring digital traffic. Okay, so our management cycle always starts with a plan of what you want to do, pilot and test it, then you actually implement that change, and the Google Analytics comes in the measurement bit. So that's how it fits in, and once you're measuring, you then use that data to review and refine your activity and improve it over time. So that's where Google Analytics sits into the cycle of what we're doing. When you're trying new marketing strategies, don't forget there are often grant funds available to help you improve strategy, your planning, your implementation and your measurement. So if you're getting stuck with some of this and you need some help, there is some support out there for smaller businesses to help them get to grips with that system. Okay, so what can Google Analytics actually do? Essentially it's a tool that can be used to track visitor numbers and their behaviour, and we're looking at trends over time. So when you first start using Google Analytics, if you've not used it before, you're essentially doing some baseline, some steady state situation measuring. Once you know what that is and you're comfortable with that, if you're not changing your marketing very much, you might want to move from a monthly to a quarterly exercise. But don't do that to start with. Keep an eye on things. Monthly is a good way to start. There is one exception to that, and if you're using pay-per-click advertising, and that's usually monitored on a daily basis because you can set a daily budget. Okay, so let's move on to what actually should you be measuring and monitoring. So I'm going to focus on three different groups of measures, if you like. The first one is how many visitors, the quantity of visitors coming to your website. The second one is some sort of measure of whether they're good quality visits, whether people are really interested in your website or whether they've got there by accident or they've searched for the wrong term. It tells you a little bit about the quality of the visits. And thirdly, it tells you what content they're looking for. So that's where you can really tell whether your marketing strategy is working or not. If you're directing them to certain places and that's working, you're going to pick up numbers on particular bits of content. Okay, so when you get into your Google Analytics account, start with the audience overview screen. This is like the first place to start. It's the place to get to grips with things. So you can see I've ringed a few things for you to look at. So audience overview, because that's where we are. On the right hand side you've got dates, which you can click on and you can change the date. So say if you're measuring monthly, you might want to say 1st of June to the 30th of June for June's figures, and then 1st of July to end of July, so you get a month-on-month figure. But if you want to know what your website's been doing and you've not been analysing for a while but Google Analytics is set up, you can go back and look over the historical data and see, what did we get in the last year or 2 years if it's been set up but you've not been using it. So that's a good place to start with. We would use it particularly for a new client who hadn't been looking at Google Analytics but it was already set up. And then we start with, underneath the graphs, you've got the first figure to look at, which is sessions. So that's the number of visits, and they're just referred to as sessions. So hopefully I'm not going to blind you with too much jargon, but that's one you will need to get to grips with. So let's start with our first set of measures, our quantity of visitors. So again, you're going to go back to your audience overview screen, the one we're going to start with. Set the dates that you want to analyse. As I say, I recommend you start with the monthly one. And make a note of the numbers. I always monitor these on a separate Excel spreadsheet. So once you've got those numbers, you can analyse it by coming away from Google and setting up your own graphs and looking at trends that way. It's just easier than looking at 1 month in isolation or 1 day in isolation. So I transfer all of those figures onto an Excel spreadsheet so that I can play about with them later. Okay, so we've got new or returning visits or sessions. If I go back up a screen, Caroline would do that for me. You can see that's in the same session. You've got the users, and the new or returning is the bar graph on the right hand side, the green and the blue. So a new visitor, somebody who's never been on your website. A returning visitor is somebody that's been on your website previously. So that's where we find that information. And then we're going to have a look at the lead source. Sorry, I'm just switching between the slides. I've lost my thread now. So under the graphs and overview page, you'll find the data on the sessions, the number of users, and the number of pages they've used. Google then calculates an average number of pages per session. And that's already done for you, but if you want to check on your Excel spreadsheet that you've got the figures right, you can actually do a calculation and check that it agrees. The second tier of stats gives the average time on your website per visitor. So you might want to convert, that gives you minutes and seconds, you might want to just convert it to seconds for graphing it, it makes it a bit easier. And also on there in the second tier of figures, it gives you the bounce rate. So a bounce rate is percentage of visitors that just go to one page on your website. So it could be that they go onto your home page and they don't like what they see, it's not what they were searching for and they come straight off, or it could be, certainly in the case of the data I've got on here, that there's a login page, so they go to that page and they don't go anywhere else because it's a login to that system, so you wouldn't expect them to go anywhere else. So that's quantity. If we get onto lead source, we need to use a different page, so you're looking at the acquisition overview screen. So if you go down the left hand side, you'll find acquisition and click on overview, which is the first one underneath that, and that will tell you where your website visitors have actually come from. And Google's going to track the behaviour under the 4 headings that it calls channels. So you can see them on the pie chart, the 4 different colours on the pie chart. And at the bottom, underneath the charts, you can see the 4 different colours of channels, as Google refers to them. So the first one is direct. So if somebody's labelled as a visit under direct, they know exactly what your unique website reference code is. So for example, on our website, they'll have looked for aardvark marketing, maybe with the .co.uk on the end, but they know what they're searching for. They know your address. So they probably already know you. So that's a direct visit. So somebody's typed in exactly the website they want. Underneath that, you've got the organic search. So these are people that have found your website because they've been searching for a particular keyword, either in Google or it could be another search engine. So for example, if our company, they might have typed marketing or marketing Worcester, and that's come up with aardvark marketing as an option, which they've then clicked on. So this is the traffic that you can increase by actively doing good search engine optimization or SEO work. You've probably heard of SEO being bandied about by marketing people. So it essentially means making your website attractive and putting content on it and putting tags on it that Google can pick up and match to keywords that people are searching for. So anything that's searched is going to come in that organic search. The third channel is our social media channel. So these are people that have reached your website when they've clicked on a social media website, for example, Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn. So if they're looking at my LinkedIn profile, for example, and they want to find out a little bit more about aardvark as well as Jill, they will click on a LinkedIn link that will take them back to aardvark marketing website, and it will come up in that social as a LinkedIn visit. That's where it's come from. And finally, there are other referrals. So these are people that have come to your website from another website that has a hyperlink to yours. So for example, if we're thinking about BizSmart, where I'm a core advisor for BizSmart, if you go on the BizSmart website and find advisor Jill Hutchinson, there's a link on that page that says click icon to view the website, and that takes you to my aardvark marketing website, and that will be tracked as a visitor that come from referral. So you've got your 4 channels to your website, and so when you do marketing activity, you can check which of those channels are picking up traffic. If you click on each one of those, it will send you to a screen that gives you more detail. So we're going to drill down a little bit into each channel. So for example, I put in front of you the social media channel. So I've just gone on, click either on the graph or on the link underneath. It doesn't matter which, it takes you to this page. So in this example, this is a business that sells B2B. So the social media traffic that they're experiencing is predominantly coming from LinkedIn. You'll see that as the top one, and some Twitter activity as well. So there's no Facebook on there because they don't use Facebook. So that's what you'd expect. Okay, so the next thing that's useful to look at is check what device your visitors are using. So again, go back to your main screen and click on the audience, and then the section that says mobile overview. Okay, so we've got the technology audience mobile overview screen there, and you'll see underneath there are 3 different sections. Okay, so it tells you whether they've come to your website on their PC, which will probably be during working hours, not necessarily, but tends to be during working hours if people are on a PC at their desk. And it tells you how many comes through tablet, and it tells you how many coming through mobile phone. So in this particular example that I've got in front of you, you can see most access is done in work time via the desktop. The visitors were probably at work and they've come either to the login or they've come to check this business out. So they're in work mode, not play mode. If your website isn't mobile friendly, this is one of the ways you can check whether you're getting traffic on mobile, and you can decide whether it's worthwhile investing in changing your website to make it mobile friendly. So in the case of this business, nearly all the traffic is PC based, so they might not need to do that. I think their website is actually mobile responsive. But if it isn't and you want to make a decision about whether it's worthwhile, that's whether you can check how many visitors you're getting who are actually using mobile. But don't forget, if they want to use it and it's not very good, that will also drive down traffic because they'll come off. Okay, so those are the first set of measures on numbers of visitors and a little bit of information about where they've come from. The second group of figures to look at is the quality of the visits. Are these good quality for your business? Are these the right sort of visits that you want people to do? So in general, We're looking at the number of pages. The more pages they look at, generally, the better, and how long they're spending on your website. And again, the more time people are spending on your website, if they like the content and they're looking at it a lot, that's a good thing. And we're going to look at bounce rate to see whether they're good quality, because these are people that just looked at one page. So it could be that they've logged into the page, they found everything they want, in which case that's fine. It could be that they're coming from search or from an advertising campaign, and there's some sort of mismatch. They're not getting what they expected to find, and so they come straight off again. Okay, so we're going to go back to our audience overview screen to get some information about the quality of the visits. Okay, so the first thing to look at is the page view and the average number of pages that each visitor looks at. So these are the top figures along the top just underneath the graphs, those first four. So the more pages per session, the better in general. And the time spent, again, the longer the visitor session, the better. So if you track that over time and the content you're producing is interesting and engaging, hopefully you'll see those measures go up. Okay, so we talked about bounce rate and said too high could indicate people are not finding what they want. So they are coming to your website, which is good, but they're not finding what they want. Alternatively, it could be that your marketing is actually driving the wrong people to your website. Which can happen if you've got AdWords, for example, that are not finding the right people for you. So either a general sort of rule of thumb, although every business is different, I would say if your bounce rate is anything higher than 50%, you should investigate it further. There might be a reason for that, and that might be okay, but generally 50% is where I would start thinking, we might need to have a look at this and delve a bit deeper and drill down. The other thing to remember, these engagement measures, these things that tell you about how visitors like your website, essentially, if they stay on it, Google tracks this too. And Google will use some of these quality measures as an indicator of how engaging your site is and rank it against the competition. So for example, if Google see that there's a high bounce rate, or you've got a very low number of pages visited per visit per user, that could indicate that visitors are just not interested in your website content that they find, and Google will move your website down the rankings. Okay. Conversely, if Google see that these figures are going up and you're getting good engagement and your visitors are looking at lots of pages and they're spending a lot of time, they will move your site up the ranking. So this is where Google is picking up some of the data it will use to rank your site. Not all of it, but some of it. Third set of measures are the content. So this is where we can have a bit of fun when looking about the popularity of pages. This is usually where people get a bit more interested, even if they don't like data very much. So we're going to have a look at what your visitors are actually reviewing. So let's have a look. So for this, we need to go to the behavior overview page. So back to your main menu, find the behavior and click on the overview. So what you'll find in that menu that I've ringed in the middle are the page titles, and on the right hand side it's the number of visitors. Okay, the first listing is nearly always the home page. So sometimes Google will list your home website address out in full with a backslash at the end. Sometimes you just get the slash. A slash only denotes that it is your home page, so don't worry if you see that, that's quite normal. The other thing to note, and I've ringed on the bottom right, Google only lists the first 10 when you first open this behavior overview page, and you probably want to look at everything, so you need to click on that link that says view full report. It's a link in the bottom right hand corner, and you'll see the complete list of pages. So I find it most useful to open up that view full report section, and then I use a search box to list all the pages I'm interested in. So for example, if I'm looking for an overview, I might want all the blog page visitors, and I'll just type blog or news, depending on what you've got on your page, into the search box, and it will list all the blog pages that people have looked at, and the most popular is at the top. So that tells me which blogs people have found most interesting, or which have got the most traffic. And that's useful to know and get some feedback. If you're blogging regularly, it's quite useful to know which ones are most popular. And then if you go on and drill down, you'll find there's behavior flow diagrams. Now some people like diagrams and they like flow diagrams, they find it useful. and it's a bit more visual than looking at numbers. So if you want to look at that in a flow chart way, you click on behaviour flow diagrams. So that tells you about what people are actually looking at. If you're driving traffic to your pricing page, for example, it's really important you can see that picking up. If you're driving them to download a white paper, or you want to drive them to see your testimonials or a case study, this is where you will pick up which pages those visitors have actually been on, and it gives you a measure of whether it's working. So those are my three sort of measures. So what you need to do is just start. Okay, it's free way to check your marketing activity. If you haven't used it before, just look at those measures. It's a good place to start. It doesn't take too long each month. Use the data to get an overall feel. So if you're looking at it once a month, you will get down to the data and you'll know what the sort of baseline measure should be. And if something looks a bit unusual one month, you can then go further into the menus and drill down to see the detail you need to. But when you start, you don't need to look at the detail of everything that's in there. So if you stick to the measures I've given you, that will give you a good overview to get you started. Okay, so questions are, is it driving visitors to the right places? You can track this by giving each of your landing pages a unique reference. Do your visitors like the content? You look at your bounce rate, and the time on the site will give you an indication of whether they like what they're seeing. And if you're trying different social media platforms, for example, you might be trying LinkedIn for the first time or Facebook for the first time, you can see the traffic pick up. Or you might be using different strategies to drive website visits. So you might be trying emails campaigns, for example, and you want them to click through particular landing pages. And you can look for increased traffic through each of those specific channels. Okay, so once you've got a feel for that, the trends are almost as important as the absolute data, and you can use that data to help you decide whether your digital marketing is working or not. If you're advertising, you can actually take some ROI figures, some return on investment figures directly from that by looking at the paid for advertising section. And you can also set goals on Google Analytics. It's not absolutely necessary to do that. You can do your goals offline and just see how the figures go, but you might want to use the number tracking as a goal for your marketing. Okay, so that gives you an overview of what to do, the measures I suggest you start with, and then drill deeper if you find something that looks unusual, but you won't know what's unusual to start with until you've done it for, say, 4 to 6 months. Okay, if you're analysing data because you're doing paid for advertising, it's really essential to monitor this. So probably on a daily basis, because it will tell you much more about the number and quality of the leads generated to calculate your return on investment. That's really important if you're investing in advertising through this channel. Okay, so if you've got to grips with Google Analytics, or you think you might need more in terms of Big Brother capabilities, is generally moving from numbers of visitors, looking at each website page, and that's interesting, but you can actually now track who's visiting your website, and that can be much more powerful. So if your product is a fairly niche product, if you're in a B2B type of business, so you're not dealing with thousands of prospects, you're dealing with hundreds or tens or occasionally just a handful at a time, and you might want then to contact them individually when they visited a particular page and send them an individually targeted or tailored message. And you can do that if you up your game a little bit and start measuring who's visiting your website. And if you haven't got great numbers, that's much more valuable. So if that's of interest to you, we recommend using something like SharpSpring. It allows you to see a little bit more about the person who's looking at your website, so you can see which pages they looked at, you can see how long they spent on it, you can see what time of day they looked because it tracks when they did that and what device they were using, so whether they're on the mobile or a tablet or a PC. And all of that's really useful information. So if the numbers are not enough and you've got small numbers of prospects and you want to really tailor message down, you can by investing in something that will track who's visited your website. There are others. You don't have to dive straight into something like SharpSpring. It's just automation and CRM and quite a lot else besides. If that's too much, you can just get a simple web tracking system. Lead Forensics is the one most people know about. It is the sort of industry leader, if you like, Lead Forensics. but it does tie you in. If you buy Lead Forensic, it ties you into a long-term contract, and it's fairly expensive. It's very good, but it's expensive, and you need to stick with it. So that might not be a first place to start. There is another tool called Fastbase, which is an American tool. It's more affordable for SMEs, and it's flexible because you can just use it a month at a time. So if you just want to know who's visited your website, you might want to look at Fastbase rather than a full automation CRM and web tracking system that SharpSpring would do. Okay, so I hope that's helped. As you can see, if you've followed that basic outline of what to monitor, you'll get some idea of digital behaviour of visitors to your website. You'll have some ideas of your strategies of working, and it's a great measurement tool which you might want to use as a key performance indicator tool for your business as well. So hopefully you now feel confident you can have a go at it. And say, don't forget, there is grant funding support. If this is completely new to you and digital is a bit of a mystery and you want some help improving your digital marketing strategy, you can get specialist help with that will be covered through a grant. And the more sophisticated marketing tracking, the who's on your website, if it's appropriate to grow your business, you can get some help for that. So thank you for listening, and we'll take any questions from Caroline.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jill. Yeah, you've got a couple of questions come through. Your first one is from Russell, and he asks, is it possible to set up myself and get started?
It is, Russell. You can do that, and you can build your own website, but most people I talk to in an SME business will be quite happy to delegate that to an expert who'll do it faster. And if you ask your website builder or your marketing agency to set it up for you when they build your site, it just takes a few minutes. It's not a huge job, and it will probably take you longer than a few minutes, so I'd recommend you get your agency to do it. It isn't expensive.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Les. How long do I have to stick with this to get used to using the system and make the information meaningful?
Okay, well, as with all digital marketing, it's all about familiarity. So I would say always a task that you do daily, you'll feel comfortable with in a week or 2 weeks. One you do weekly, it will take you a couple of months. If you do it monthly, it's going to take you a little bit longer. So probably 4 to 5 months if you're just doing it once a month, but you might want to build a bit of familiarity and do that earlier. You've also got to log into your Google account, so don't forget, keep a note of your password and keep it safe. So you log in with your Google email and a specified password, and you just get used to that. You can remember that, keep a note of that. I would just suggest, so if you're building up your Excel spreadsheets to build up your personal dashboard, that you look at it monthly. And the first 2 or 3 months, you'll probably want this webinar open on the side of you or on another screen and work through it, and you'll be fine. So you're just building familiarity every time you do it, but stick with it. 4 to 6 months, you'll be absolutely comfortable with that data.
Okay, thank you. Your next question is from Philip. Does ad blockers block third-party analytics scripts like Google Analytics? And if so, how does this affect the numbers and what can I do about it?
Ad blockers are a funny one. It depends how they're set up. So that might be one, Philippe, that I would take offline and talk to you about how that's actually set up. I might need to dig a bit deeper on that. But yes, Google Analytics can be set up badly. I was at a client last week that had one of these websites that you buy the platform and they do all the hosting for you. And I looked at the Google Analytics and got some data from that. And my client had logged into the stats that the platform had sent and they didn't match. The Google Analytics tracking wasn't picking everything up. So there are ways that things aren't tracked, but you're getting into really sort of techie data there. So I would have to know exactly how it was set up and why that was. But yes, things like ad blockers will affect Google Analytics, but there are other things that can affect Google Analytics too. There are things called website bots, which are automated systems that will bounce in and out of your website, and you might want to block those. So you can set up filters, but I'm getting into a more detailed conversation. So if you have a specific issue around your particular website and the way Google Analytics is working for you, call BizSmart, they'll put you through to me, and we can have an offline conversation, because every situation will be different.
Great, thanks Jill. Another question from Kevin. What would you say are the 3 to 5 key measures we should track on Google Analytics?
Oh, okay, Kevin. So I've given you 3 groups of measures. I think there's about 10 or 12. So if you do all the recommendations that I've been through on the webinar, it will give you about 10 or 12. Once you're used to it, it will only take you a few minutes to go in and have a look at those each month. So we're not talking a lot of time, and it will literally take you to half an hour max just to get used to it. So I don't know quite how many, Carol, were you counting as we went through? It's probably a dozen. It's probably a dozen, and that's enough for you to see that yes, my website is healthy, or no, I need to dig a bit deeper and find out a bit more. So I hope that helps.
Great. Thank you very much. I think those are all your questions. Thank you again, Jill, for hosting today's webinar. I will be sending out a copy of the presentation and Jill's contact details out to you all shortly, so please do email direct if you have any further questions. Before we close, just a quick reminder that this webinar is part of our service to our Smart Room members. If you're not already a member or a BizSmart client and would like to access our archive of webinars, then please visit our website, biz-smart.co.uk, and go to the Smart Room page. That's the end of today's webinar. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope you can join us again very soon.